I have been making music with fake drums since the 1990s, before drum plugins even existed. Then I spent 25 years recording and mixing real bands with real drums, and I forgot all about fake drums. In that time, about 1 million drum sampler plugins came into existence. I'm going to try to be nice and just say there was room for improvement. So I dedicated over 2 years of my life to rethinking everything about plug-in drums. Fast forward to the present, my little baby is changing the game for indie musicians everywhere, every single day. I want to show you exactly how I made it all happen. This is the earliest known footage of Robot Dog drums, December 18th, 2020 at 7:09 p.m. You can see it's just a couple of samples running in Logic's built-in sampler in the background there. I posted this clip to Facebook and it got a lot of attention for me at the time. People were digging it, even though it was still essentially a brain in a jar with no graphical user interface or anything. My friends gave me a lot of encouragement. That was huge. It can't be understated how important that was through this entire process. But I think I'm skipping ahead a bit. Who the heck am I? Well, I'm a full-time recording engineer and music producer, and at the time I owned a studio. It was called Robot Dog Studio, and it was in Vermont, and it was busy, and it was popular, and it was much beloved in the community. And it was named after my dog Robot, of course. I know what you're expecting me to say. Then COVID hit, right? Well, no, not exactly. That was a really trying time for me, my family, and the studio, but we actually really thrived through it. I quote-unquote hunkered down and became obsessed with live streaming. I set up this really simple and high-quality way to stream live bands from the studio. It wasn't long before the biggest music venue in the area wanted to partner up to do concerts. But anyway, that wasn't how I lost the studio. Basically, a bigger company wanted to expand and pushed me out of the industrial space we were both renting. Believe me, it got ugly. I was bitter. It was a pretty dark time. So anyway, I was losing the studio. The real estate scene in Vermont was a show. So with limited prospects of continuing this business, I had to take stock and kind of think about my musical legacy there. I'd recorded hundreds of drum kits in this space. I knew exactly what to do and exactly how to do it there. With a move-out date looming, I set to preserve something of the work that I had done. I was going to at least record a sample pack of the house kit. Now, this wasn't my first experience recording or using drum samples. I had been recording music on computers since the 90s when I was a teenager. There weren't really software samplers at the time, but it made perfect sense for me to hook my old Mac up to an Alesis D4 drum module. I was programming drums and making demos like this back in 1998. As soon as I got an audio interface with enough inputs, I started recording real drums. I didn't know what I was doing, but again, the drum sampling thing made perfect sense to me. As soon as I had successfully recorded an acoustic drum kit, I cut it all up and put it into an old version of Native Instruments Battery, I think. I moved away from home, I went to college, and I could no longer record loud drums. So I took those samples and I was making my demos with them. As I started recording bands, I would pretty much like camp out in their basement practice space or whatever, and we'd record an album over a month, something like that. I'd always make these more and more comprehensive drum samples of the kit we mic'd up. Eventually I opened my studio and I was recording acoustic drums several times a week. I kind of forgot about the drum sample thing for 15 years. I was recording bands with real drums, I was learning how to tune them, tech them, mic them, engineer them, and then finally mix them and master them. So I wasn't thinking about drum samples or sampler plugins or drum sample pack libraries. I was recording real bands with real drums. I had no use. And you know what? I was actually an early adopter of some of the earliest multi-track drum sample packs. You know, I had BFD1 when it came in paper boxes that you used to have to order out of a catalog. And I remember it being like an amazing thing theoretically, but I never really got any good use out of it. We're talking early 2000s. I didn't have 20 years of engineering and mixing and mastering experience under my belt. So while BFD was an amazing concept, it was basically just handing you all these completely raw drum samples, and I had no idea what to do with them. It was like getting a really awesome raw fish when you had, ordered a salmon dinner. But by 2020, it had been a long time since BFD1. I was aware of the major drum sample packs out there, but I still kind of wrote them off. It seemed to me that they were either so polished that they sounded cheesy and unrealistic in a mix, or they were so indie that they just sounded janky and not powerful. My first goal was just to make realistic but powerful sounding drums. I achieved this almost immediately. I didn't do anything crazy, I just mic'd and recorded them like I usually did, and then I threw them into a song and I mixed them like I usually did. That was the other thing, I wanted to make these drums fully mixed. I remembered the weirdness and frustration I had had with that early version of BFD. Mixing drums and mixing music, it's a long journey, and I had gone on that journey and come back. I had no reason to gatekeep those skills and abilities from other people that could use them. Hell, it was really part of what I had to offer. I was an experienced chef, so to speak. I did not want to hand my diners that raw fish. Part of my value was my cooking, not just my ability to scour fish market. Also, it's just a weird concept. Why do you have to mix acoustic drums? Why can't you use just like total presets on everything? That's because they sound different every time you record them. Every kit and every session needs to be mixed differently. These drum samples were recorded once and they're never gonna change. I can mix them once and people can have that mixed sound to use. I don't have to force hundreds or thousands of people to do the same exact thing over and over for no reason. That said, maybe you want to do your own thing with the mix. At some point, the character knob came into play. All the way to the left, you have those raw, unmixed samples if you want to mix them exactly the way you want to mix them. Turn it all the way to the right and you have an amazing, fully polished, modern mix going in no time. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself, right? We still had no graphical user interface. We just had a pack of samples. I had thrown them into Logic's built-in sampler and they were sounding great. Best sounding, best feeling drum samples I had ever used. People were getting excited. They could hear what we were working with. So I wanted to offer them for sale at some point, right? Maybe be the next Steven Slate. I shared my plans with some trusted friends. I was like, I will release them on the Logic sampler and, what's this? It's a free open source text-based sampler. I'll release it on that. So one very smart friend in particular was, he wasn't too enthusiastic about the idea. He's like, maybe do some market research and see how many producers use that sampler. I didn't have to research it. I knew there were not many. Okay, what's this other thing? A couple of these really, really well-respected sample packs are using Contact Player. This could work. I have no clue how to code. I also don't know what the process is like to get it encoded by Native Instruments, but it's a start. I'm sure I can program like the most bare bones graphical user interface possible and people will get these awesome samples that I made and they'll just want to use it based on the sound quality, right? So I started designing this ugly user interface that was just gonna be like, I don't know, the kit pieces like in a list or something like that. I was pretty psyched on it. So I brought another friend over and they're like kind of my target customer. They use these libraries, they do great work with them. I showed them the interface and I was all prepared for them to love it, right? Not so much. This was another super pivotal moment. They were like, you've got to have that graphical kit there. It's got to be, you got to see it and it's got to be, you got to want to click on it and it's got to be fun to use. That's going to be your billboard when you're putting it out there. That's pretty much all there is to it. So I was like, there's no way I'm gonna learn Blender and make this 3D rendered kit or hit someone up on Fiverr to do it. What if I do this? So I went right on like a stock photo site or stock illustration site and I started downloading all these little, drawings of drum sets and just trying to get inspired. It was a start. I thought maybe it could work. It was all I had to go off of. And then I really dug in. I had actually been a graphic design and drawing, fine arts major in college, so I knew a little bit how to illustrate, but I've never really had the flair or the passion of a real illustrator. But I got to work anyway. It literally took me a week working full-time to make this drum kit illustration. But it had something. It represented what I was doing. It was DIY in its own way, and it was Just a complete departure from anything else anyone was doing in this genre of software. But it had to come to life. It had to be animated in some way. This came together really naturally and effectively. Just these one-frame animations, suddenly it was full of life. It was popping. But yet again, I'm stepping ahead. I had no idea how to code anything. I had always been a computer geek. I had always been into building things, DIY, all that kind of stuff. When I was a kid, I even had a Commodore VIC-20, and I would program things on Commodore BASIC. I knew a little bit of BASIC. But like all the heavy duty coding languages, they just baffled me. And I was really, really intimidated. This is where COVID turned into a huge boon for me. It was deep in winter 2020. Maybe some of the country was opened up and doing things, but in Vermont, we hadn't been touched by COVID much until like November 1st. And then rates skyrocketed and everyone in Vermont was taking it really seriously. All of my bookings were canceled. I had nothing to do. I was at home on the couch. So I found the one online course that existed for Contact KSP, the scripting language in Contact. I downloaded it and I threw it on my iPad. I again, quote unquote, hunkered down and I started going through this course like very methodically. Little by little I was getting it. I got the plugin to do things, the most basic things that I needed it to do. The more advanced things or like the next step always seemed impossible. Seemed impossible to learn how to do, until I learned how to do it. And, it might take a day or it might take a couple of days, but I learned how to do every little thing I needed the plugin to do. So it was early 2021 and the end was in sight. I could see what I needed to do to finish up the thing. So people would ask about it and I'd say, yeah, I need about a month to wrap it up. I just need a solid month dedicated time to wrap it up. And then what happened? Like, how did it spiral out of control? How did it take like 2 more years? Okay, definitely part of it was I wanted to test it out on an electronic drum kit. So I started putting together my own electronic drum kit and I started playing it on it. And then my mind was kind of blown when I came across this thing that Roland had developed called positional sensing. The Roland modules could somehow tell where on the snare drum head or the tom head, where on the drum head you were hitting it. This seemed so cool to me. And I knew the other brands were not really taking advantage of it. Sure, it did exist on some of the plugins, but it was just kind of a weird implementation. And they usually only had basically 3 zones. But I was like, no way, I'm gonna hit this drum every way you could possibly hit it. I'm gonna capture it, I'm gonna put it in this plugin. And if someone has a Roland module or a Roland compatible module with positional sensing, they're gonna be able to access every tone you can possibly get out of a snare drum. So this was one of many crap moments where I told myself I had to redo everything. So I did. I redid all my snare drums. I had my friends bring back all their snare drums and I resampled all those drums. At the same time, my move out date was getting closer and closer, so I was hustling so fast and so hard to get all these drums sampled. Of course, it went from like my one house kit to doing dozens really of different drums, different cymbals, everything. So eventually I did have to move out of the studio. I even had to move out of the state, really. I, could not afford it any longer. I was still hustling recording work. I was doing mixing. I was doing location recording. I was doing mastering. I was filming a lot of concert videos. Anyways, I was working to pay the bills. It was a while before I got back to the Robot Dog Drums project. Honestly, it was the winter of 21-22 before I got back to it. I was still obsessively redoing everything, redoing the samples. I found a place where I could record and I redid all the hi-hats. I wanted to have tip and edge articulations, and I kept on mixing and perfecting the tones of the snare drums. And some of them would have these overtones that would bug me. So I would go and redo the snare drum completely until it just had this perfectly clean, huge, powerful tone. Skipping ahead here, this kind of obsession lasted all the way until the very last minute, all the way until the next winter, the winter of 22-23. I was way behind on the plugin. I had contracted with Native Instruments to deliver them the files on a certain day. It was way past that. But a really important drum, the Tama Artwood 8x14, the heavy shoegaze snare drum, it sounded so powerful, but it wasn't quite right. There was this weird ring to it. I resampled that drum on New Year's Day 2023. And while I always counsel people to like push past their perfectionism, you know, get something finished, I think there really is a place for obsession, compulsive obsessiveness, you know, in your art. I'm so glad I went back and resampled this drum. It's like I can just feel totally confident, totally happy putting it out into the world, and the response that it's gotten has just validated that like 1000%. I went that crazy extra mile, and now it can live on forever in that perfect form, and so many pieces of music out there for other people. So yeah, what else? What next? Well, I guess I did skip ahead. I said I had contracted with Native Instruments to have the plugin encoded. I think that was around summer 2022. I planned for a November 1st release date. Spoiler alert, that did not happen. But anyway, the functionality of the plugin was there, the sounds were there, but I wasn't gonna leave my users hanging there. I wasn't gonna give them the raw fish, I wasn't gonna give them the partially cooked fish, I was gonna give them a whole menu of deliciously cooked entrees. So I started on making the presets for the plugin. Now the great thing about being a really active working engineer, producer, mixer, mastering engineer, all that stuff, is that I had this huge catalog of artists and great songs that I had worked on. I went and took the cream of the crop, you know, the best examples from all these different genres, and I went about building presets of a drum sound that would work amazingly in these songs. For Big Pop Punk, I took a track I recorded for Hello Control. The now legendary heavy shoegaze preset comes from a band I recorded called Belly Up. I recorded them years ago. Basement Punk, this was a super fun one. This was totally a live recording I did at a basement show. It's all built around that. Pop rock, Good Morning Gills, fucking amazing band. Post-hardcore, Zero Circle, like the first thing I ever even recorded in the studio. Every preset has a story and a relationship and just a heart and soul. This plugin has its own mojo. Such a weird thing to say about a drum sample plugin, but it's true. I put my love and passion and heart and soul into this, and just my struggle, everything. And I just kept on working on it, kept on pushing until everything was just right. Okay, so it was a thing now. It was really gonna be released. But would anybody be able to find out about it? Would anybody use it? Would anybody know? So I guess enter TikTok. I can't even remember how it came about. I didn't know anything about TikTok. I didn't use it. For some reason, I started posting to it. All of a sudden, I was finally reaching people beyond my circle of friends, and they were rabidly excited about this thing. It was so awesome. I guess the rest is history. It was finally released, and it's been just an overwhelming success. What can I say? It's an absolute dream come true. I always thought it was rewarding being a producer and getting to work with so many bands, so many artists, getting to be like the extra member of all these bands, but to be providing a tool that anyone can use in their home studio to make amazing music, and they love this thing and they're getting inspired by it and they're sounding better than ever. I can't even put into words like what that means to me, and I just so grateful, and it means so much to me, so much. So thank you for coming along on this story time with me. If you made it this far, it would be so awesome if you wanted to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Fortunately these days, mainly what I'm doing is developing new plugins, and hopefully I'm gonna have a lot more time to make content like this. So hopefully there will be a lot more videos like this coming out. So what else? If you had any questions about the whole process of making Robot Dog drums, just let me know in the comments. And I guess until next time, have fun making music. Cheers.